Good morning. This is my second video on Foreign Minister Jaishankar's book on 10 years of Modi government foreign policy, and the book is called Why Bharat Matters. Now, the aim of making these two videos, that is to assess whether the 10 years, what is being called a distinctive foreign policy of the Modi government, has it served India's interest, or has it just been meant to project the Prime Minister as a world leader in the eyes of the people of India? Now, with this aim, I did the first video where I spoke exclusively about India's relationship with China because, in my assessment, China is the most consequential relationship for India for a couple of reasons. China today is a great power. We have a border dispute with China. There is a military standoff going on there for the last over 4 years. Then China's footprints, they loom large over entire South Asia. And its footprints are increasing by the day in the Indian Ocean region. And there I argued and I said that while this is the most consequential relationship, the Modi government or Jaishankar as the foreign minister is not tackling it the way he should be tackling it. Now, in today's video, I have picked up a couple of key things about Modi government's foreign policy, and I intend to discuss those. My start point has to be the bottom line given out in the book by Jaishankar, something that he has spoken at so many other places also, that a multipolar Asia is necessary for a multipolar world. What this means is that while we all accept that a multipolar world has come about, India believes that there has to be a multipolar Asia also, which means that India and China, they should be seen as two poles, equal poles in a multipolar world, and when you are equal, they should be seen as competing with one another. Then Jaishankar, if not he himself, people close to him argued that, look, this is not the way the Chinese see it. Chinese accept a multipolar world, but they want a unipolar Asia. They do not see any competition with India. Mind you, no Chinese policymaker, no analyst has ever said so or indicated so. But this is the thinking in India. So, let us assess this. Let us assess the whole thing about a multipolar world and a multipolar Asia so that we have a template with us on which to assess then why Bharat Matters, this book. So when we talk of a multipolar world, we think about a foreign policy of any nation. There are certain key ingredients which should always be kept in mind when crafting a foreign policy. One is the nation's national power. Then geography, where is the nation located? Then the history, its relationship with other countries. Has it ever fought a war, or is there peace in the region? The entire history is important. Has to be kept in mind when making foreign policy. And perhaps the most important is an honest appreciation of geopolitics. Now, when we say geopolitics, there are two words here, geo and politics. Geo is global, that means world. And politics is power distribution. Where is the power? Who has it? Where is it going? That's politics. So we are talking of world power distribution. Simple. We know when there was a bipolar world which existed from the end of the Second World War until 1991, when the disintegration of the Soviet Union happened, there were two distinct blocks. It was a bipolar world, and they were military blocks. And the countries that mattered, the first world and the second world countries, they were either in one block or they were in the other block. The remaining countries, the third world countries, honestly, their voice did not matter in the world. So it was about these two blocks. There was an Iron Curtain. It was an ideological battle also, and the only communication that was going on between the two was concerning security and defense matters. That's it, nothing more than that. Now, once the Soviet Union disintegrated, which was in 1991, and until 2017, we all agree that it was a unipolar movement, something unique which has never happened in the world history, that one power dominated the entire globe. So America was that power in the unipolar world. Now, when you have only one power, there's no requirement for a balance of power. But alongside, technology was also progressing. We know that the first industrial revolution, which was about steam engine, the second industrial revolution, which was about electricity. Now, this is about the technology of material, on the physical side, material. This happened in the West. Similarly, the third industrial revolution, which was about digitization, which was about computers, cyberspace, internet, it all happened in America. In other words, the three industrial revolutions, the advancement of technology, everything was happening in America and the Western world. And this is perhaps one of the key reasons why the Soviet Union disintegrated. It simply could not keep the pace of the technology which was getting created or which was germinating in the other bloc, which was the bloc led by America. Now, what has happened is, after 2017, things have changed. Rather, they changed before. They changed sometimes in 2012, because 2012 is when deep learning was discovered. Deep learning basically brought the artificial intelligence, the technology of intelligence, what we call. How do you create intelligence? Through deep learning in 2012, it came to the fore. And this is that technology, artificial intelligence, which is really a technology of technologies. That means an entire waves of technology is coming. But this is that technology which is there in all of those. When we say wave of technologies, we are talking of quantum technologies, we are talking robotics, we are talking a whole lot of things which are coming. So key is artificial intelligence, the technology of intelligence. Now, this is software driven, which means that it will keep having endless acceleration. Then it is omnipresent. It will be everywhere, this technology. It is a technology which is incubated on the commercial side, on the civilian side, and it is getting completely diffused and very fast. And then the distinctive thing about this technology is because this is the technology about intelligence, that perhaps a stage will come when the human will not be required in the loop at all, whether it is industry, whether it is warfare, whether it is any aspect of our life. Human out of the loop. Another interesting thing happened, and this happened only a year ago. Because all the while when we spoke about artificial intelligence, the talk was about artificial narrow intelligence. That means artificial intelligence in one domain. And people spoke about artificial general intelligence where you create intelligence. I mean, this is all mathematical modeling. You create intelligence, the technology of intelligence, that you are as close to a human mind, the intelligence which is there in a human mind. So it was last year that the whole world got excited when generative AI came in, when the large language models came in. And now they are talking about further things. It is not only about language models, they are talking of large vision models, they are talking of large multimodal models. All this is coming. And it is said that the three shortcomings which were there of the artificial narrow intelligence, they will be now removed perhaps by as early as 2030. So by 2030, there is a possibility that the world will see the artificial general intelligence, something that people were saying is probably 10, 20, 30 years away. And those three shortcomings we know are abstraction, contextualization, and cognition. Abstraction means that a single domain intelligence, it cannot be applied to the other domains. Now it can be done because now they are creating the multimedia models, large multimedia models. The second constraint was contextualization, which basically means that if the intelligence does something, the artificial intelligence, why it has done that, what is the reason behind that? Because if you can understand that, if you can put it in a context, then it will be so much easier to get closer to the general intelligence. Now even that will be accomplished. This problem, the bias of contextualization, will also get removed. And the third is cognition, which is basically reasoning and thinking like a human being. So now the computer scientists say that all these things are possible, and the big tech companies of the world, mind you, there are only 2 countries today in the world which can compete, which are competing across the entire artificial intelligence stack, and they are America and China. And when I say stack, what does it mean? It means hardware, it means software, and it means human talent. Because human talent is required for innovation, human talent is required for applications, and human talent is required for integration. All those applications you integrate into what is called Internet of Things. So what has happened is, as I mentioned, with the coming of generative AI, the big tech companies of the world, there are big tech companies in America. You have Microsoft, you have Google, you have Meta, or Amazon, all these companies. Similarly, there are big tech companies in China. You have Alibaba, you have Beidou, you have Tencent. I mean, China, of course, has a bit of advantage over America in the sense that they have civil military diffusion. And the government is involved, or government is pushing this field of artificial intelligence. So these two countries, basically, who have the entire AI ecosystem, they are able to create what is being called the foundational models. The foundational models are a key thing, and they require a lot of expertise, human talent, they require a lot of money that is being created by these big tech companies. But there are other countries like India, countries like Japan, all the Southeast Asian countries, so many other major powers who also want a sovereign AI capability. They want it sovereign, they want it for themselves. A AI capability so that they can make the changes themselves. They can do the applications themselves. Why? Because everybody has realized that data should be sovereign. Because data today has emerged along with software and hardware as the third most important aspect. So to have sovereignty over data, they also want sovereign artificial intelligence capabilities. And this is something which these tech companies can give them. Because what the companies can give them, let's say, we know today, in fact yesterday, the Microsoft CEO, Satya Nadella, was in Bombay, where he was talking about how he can help India with artificial intelligence. So how these companies can help is that the technology and the know-how for this creation of sovereign artificial intelligence capability for countries like India and other major powers will come from there. For us, it will come from the American companies. And Nadella was talking about how to train the Indians. He spoke about 2 million people to be trained over a period of years into the know why. How do you fix these things? How do you train these people? So what countries like India will do is, we will have the entire technology coming from outside, the know-how coming from outside. We are not doing anything here. But in the case of China, China has that technology and the know-how and the know-why everything with them. So this is how the things will be, and there is a consequence here. And the consequence is that these tech companies of this major powers, China and America, more they get the markets, they get more markets, a market in India, a huge market in India, let's say other Southeast Asian countries, then they are in a position to set their standards. Standards is important. Then they are in position to create their own cyberspace, the rules and regulations for the cyberspace. That's absolutely important for the safety of data. So a huge thing which they will get out of all this is that they will set the standards and they will monitor, regulate the cyberspace. And if you stretch this further over a long period of time, while all the nations who are getting the technology and the know-how from outside believe that they will have sovereignty over data, but perhaps at some stage there will be colonization of data. Because these big tech companies would have extracted so much of data, and data is the power today. So this is what we are looking at. Therefore, the point here is that technology is at the heart of global geopolitics period. And now recall what the Russian President Putin said in 2017, that a country that masters artificial intelligence will be the ruler of the world. That is what he meant. In other words, as far as the multipolar world is concerned, perhaps what we are looking at is, if these are the two countries who have to set the standards, who have to set the cyberspace norms and regulations, then we are looking at a technology curtain. There was an iron curtain, now we are looking at a technology curtain. When I say technology curtain, what we are talking about perhaps is that as far as commerce is concerned, because China still remains the world manufacturing factory. It is there, it is the largest trading nation, it is the largest manufacturing nation, and for all the talk that goes on in America and Europe, in EU, about decoupling, de-risking, there is no way, and including in India. Today, India-China trade, despite our problems at the border, is $136 billion and hugely in favor of China. So, when we talk of a technology curtain, we are talking of all the countries where China has gone. We are talking of Belt and Road Initiative. Of the 195 countries in the world, something like 125 countries are on board Belt and Road. Global South is there with China and Russia. Russia is also a great power for many different reasons. Now, mind you, this Global South actually has 80% of the world population. This is the world, and this is with China. In other words, we are talking about China setting the standards and not India. China setting the standards and the cyber norms over a period of time for the African continent, for the Latin American countries, for Oceania, for Asia. This is what we are talking of, a very loosely held curtain where you will have a global north and you will have a global south. As far as India is concerned, though geographically we are here as a neighbor of China, Modi government has chosen to go with the standards and the cyberspace regulations of the Americans. As I mentioned, that Microsoft and Google, they are all here. Now this is about, as far as the multipolar world is concerned, this is what the world will eventually look at. And recently, President Putin made a very distinctive statement. He said that we are looking at a world which will be democratized. Well, what he meant was, he was talking about perhaps the Global South. He was talking about, because in the Global South, where you have BRICS, where you have SCO, it is very clear that everything should move by consensus. Despite the fact that over a period of time, China will get the first mover advantage in the industries because of its entire artificial intelligence ecosystem. But there will be a democratization. Unlike in the case of the global north. I'll give you an example of that, a very recent one. The American ambassador to India, he was recently, I think last week, at the Jaipur Literary Festival, that is in Jaipur. And there, in a conversation he mentioned, he was talking about Quad. And he said that, look, India is in the driving wheel, but US will hold the steering. Now, exactly what he said is that US will have the corrective steering wheel. Now, what do you mean? India is in the driving seat, but if you are holding the correct steering wheel, that means you are the one who will steer the whole thing. In other words, Americans have never known. I mean, today they are not the nation that they were during the unipolar world, but they simply don't know what is being a democratic nation. They simply don't know what is a partnership. Now, this is what President Putin was talking about when he spoke all this. Now, this is about the multipolar world. I also mentioned about national power. Now, let us, if we are talking of Asia, a multipolar Asia, let us quickly see the national power of India and China. Now, when we talk of national power at a time like this, when major shifts, when the geopolitical shifts are happening from a unipolar to a multipolar world, then we are only talking of hard power. We are honestly not talking of soft power at this time. And hard power, there are three elements. You have economic power, military power, and technology power. Let me dwell on these very quickly and a bit on this. Now, economic power. India says that today it has a GDP of $3.72 trillion. But the problem is, this GDP, India is a service-based economy. And in the service-based economy, you cannot generate so many jobs. It is not possible. Whereas, 5 times more, China is an 18 trillion economy, but it is the manufacturing hub of the world. And for all the talk which goes on in the world, that, there is an economic collapse happening in China, if you read everything very carefully, what is going on, you realize that there is a transition happening. There is a transition happening under President Xi Jinping, where the Chinese today are talking of 4 news. They are talking of new energy, transition to new energy, which is your electric vehicles, solar panels, all this is happening. They are talking of new technology. A whole technology wave is coming. Then they are talking about new consumption. Now, when I say consumption, it obviously refers to their policy, which was initiated 3 years back, which is the dual circulation policy, where they want to now focus more on domestic consumption. So that is the new consumption, and they are talking of new infrastructure, which is the industries. That the industries are now moving towards artificial intelligence, the use of artificial intelligence in the industry, so that the productivity goes up. Now tell me, how exactly do you square up this economy? Now the Modi government says it will become 5 trillion, 10 trillion. They are even talking of 30, 40 trillion in a distance. It is so much far that it's all a fantasy. It is not real. So, and the reason for that is you have to invest in R&D. If I check the figures of the R&D investment done by China, it is 2.5% of their GDP. And India invests 0.57% of the GDP when there is a huge difference between the two GDP. You can well imagine what sort of money is being invested. And China has been investing in science and technology since decades. When Deng Xiaoping took over as the supreme leader in 1979, he announced 4 modernizations, and one of the modernization was science and technology. So they have invested over decades in science and technology. They invest heavily in R&D. There is a civil military fusion. I mean, these are those reasons. You can't grudge them that they are today the innovation center and a manufacturing hub of the world. And there is no way that anybody can decouple from them. Now, let's talk of technology power. I've already spoken of China's technology power. Let me just talk about technology power of India. Now, see, the key thing is DRDO. We know we have DRDO. And we keep getting these reports, keep coming that look, the DRDO now has done this. It has now come up with hypersonic missiles are being generated, and electromagnetic they are working on electromagnetic spectrum. Then they are working on directed energy weapons. And lo and behold, in this December 2023, we are suddenly told that look, all this talk of Make in India, Atmanirbhar Bharat actually has not gone anywhere as far as defense is concerned, for the simple reason that there is a Vijay Raghavan committee. Vijay Raghavan is the scientific advisor to the Prime Minister. His committee headed by him has submitted a report where they said that DRDO has failed to meet its targets miserably. There are huge gaps in DRDO and a total revamp of the DRDO is required. Then what is all this about, this Atmanirbhar Bharat? The point is that we simply assemble the things here. We are not innovating things here. This is the big difference between the two, between India and China. Let's see the military power. Military power, I've spoken a lot in my earlier video. Very brief. Now, I'll leave it to the viewers to assess. Here is a country, China, which says, or which has today the capability to fight in 7 domains, and it has created 5 forces to fight in 7 domains. The 5 forces are Army, Air Force, Navy, Rocket Force, and now they are looking at creating, rather the process has started, of a new space force which is looking at the hypersonic space, which is the higher hypersonic space. That is what they are looking at. These are the forces they've created, and the domains they can fight in is land, air, sea, electromagnetic spectrum, cyber, space, and near space. This is where they can fight. Compare this with the Indian military, which has only 3 domains, which is land, air, and sea, nothing else. All the technology that they are talking about getting in is basically a force multiplier. It is not meant to create domains. So it's a different ball game altogether. Now, why I'm saying all this is, if this is what the difference is between the two, do you really expect or believe that India is actually competing in Asia with China? No, it isn't. And this is the reason. Now I'll come to Jaishankar's book, where he has cleverly omitted a lot of things. He has only focused on India's geography. He does not talk about national power in comparison to China. As I said, should be part of the foreign policy, and he does not even mention history. He has only taken geography and built the entire foreign policy narrative on it, which obviously does not help India. Now let me discuss a few of the key points, distinctive points that Jaishankar has mentioned about Modi government's 10 years foreign policy in the book. So the first one is he talks about mandala. Mandala is a Sanskrit word which basically means a circle. He talks about a conceptual mandala and a spatial mandala. In the conceptual mandala, he says that India has built its national power through Make in India and Atmanirbhar Bharat. The fact of the matter is, as I mentioned earlier also, that if the technology and the know-how is coming from outside, honestly what you are doing is only assembly here, nothing else. This is something which used to happen earlier also. You have simply given a new name, Atmanirbhar Bharat, and as far as your startups are concerned, the Indian startups are very different from the startups that we find in America or in China. Because in those two countries, there are huge tech giant tech companies It is those tech companies which are financing or largely financing the startups. And it is at the startups then the innovation is happening, which is not the case in India. Whether they are startups or whether they are unicorns, they are doing precisely what the other companies are doing. They are getting the technology and know-how from outside, whether it is drones or whatever you say. So much for the Atmanirbharta. See, we have to be honest if we want to build national power. Now, coming to what he talks about, the spatial mandala, here he says that at the center of the circle, right from the beginning, when the Modi government came to power in 2014, is its neighborhood first policy. And he gives the example that at that time, at the swearing in ceremony in 2014, Prime Minister Modi had invited all the heads of government of the SAARC nation. Well, that is very good. But unfortunately, what happened immediately after that was that in 2014, there was a SAARC summit in Kathmandu, where 5 nations of SAARC, Pakistan, Nepal, Maldives, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, they all said that China, which has been an observer in SAARC since 2015 to since 2005, it should now be made a full member of SAARC. And there was panic in India. Because if China comes in SAARC, then the position or what India thinks that all the neighbors are subservient to it, it will lose that position, that status that it has built for itself, the pedestal that it is sitting on. It will no longer be there. So, not understanding the fact that why were these nations asking for China to come? Because they want to make use of both big powers, India and China. They want to see what best they can get from both, because in 2013 itself, China had announced the Belt and Road Initiative. Most of these countries had already signed for the initiative, or they were in the process of thinking about signing them, which now of course all have done. But as I said, there was panic in India. Therefore, in 2016, Uri happened, Uri attacks, and that was a good enough reason, India thought, to not attend the 2016 SAARC summit in Pakistan. Pakistan was now a terrorist state. So that was the end of SAARC. Not realizing that, look, the Belt and Road Initiative is moving. The belt is moving, the road is moving, and the maritime Silk Road is moving. And today we already have a situation where there is an elongated footprint of PLA Navy in the Indian Ocean region. Their survey ships are here. And we cannot stop them honestly, because these are the global commons. They will be here, and these survey ships are doing hydrological work, hydrographic work, and they are mapping the seafloor. Because obviously it will help them in the undersea drones, and it will help them in the submarine warfare. Because for them, this entire Indian Ocean region from Malacca to Hormuz is their Achilles heel. It is their biggest vulnerability. Their huge trade, their commerce of the tune of about $4 trillion, every year it passes through this. So China in any case will be here. But to talk of neighborhood first policy, if your center is gone, if your foundation is gone, what are you talking about this mandala? So what he's talking about is, Jaishankar says that now we are looking at extended neighborhood, something the earlier governments had not done. Because when Modi came to power, the Look East policy was converted into Act East policy, which basically meant connectivity, it meant maritime security, and we are looking at ASEAN and even as far as the Oceania, the Pacific Islands. And then this government had is considering or is working on the Link West, which is the Gulf nations. Then there are a lot of acronyms which have been thrown in, like I2, U2. Then the Prime Minister and our delegations have gone to the Nordic nations. Look, the point is, all these visits by the Prime Minister or Indian delegation is good. We must go wherever we wish to. And every country will welcome you, because after all, India is a huge market. India has a young demography. India actually has a lot of talent in software, so they welcome you. But the point is that, can you really build the bridges there which will last? Because you simply don't have the national power. You do not have the capability for infrastructure building far away. You do not have such deep pockets as China has. And you simply do not have the military power to take you there to all these countries. So this is all a big thing, a big show, which is being conveyed to the people of India, certainly is not helping India per se as a nation, its national interest. Now, as I mentioned, that cleverly Modi government policy, of course, crafted by, I repeatedly say this, Jaishankar is the architect of that. All the other instruments of foreign policy making, he has ignored, and he is focused on geography because that is India's strength. Indeed, India sits astride the Indian Ocean region. So the Americans want India, the Westerners want India, EU wants India. All these nations want India, because if they are to ever threaten the trade of China, this is the place, it's Achilles' heel. And India provides that launching pad to them. Similarly, on the other side, you have, in this changing world order, you have China and you have Russia, two big powers. As far as their trade is concerned, they also want India on their side, not only for trade, but also for creating what they are doing, the alternate international institutions like BRICS. They want India to be there. So geography is certainly a strength. It is against this backdrop that I talk about Quad. So to begin with, an assumption has been made, a big assumption by Jaishankar, where he says that India finally, under the Modi government, got over the hesitancy, the strategic hesitancy of history. And he says that US is premier power of our times and will remain so. I don't think so. Most people don't think so. And as I have argued, the world is changing very fast. And the Americans themselves concede that they are weak today. If they weren't weak, why would they looking for strategic partners? Why would they be adding the outside nations to their deterrence in the region to make it integrated deterrence? They are weak. They are weak on their strength, which is military power. So they want India. Not only that, now he lists many things in Quad which are being done. For example, as I had mentioned earlier, that the big companies, they are basically setting the standards. They are bringing their technology and know-how. And they want India to be part of that. It's a big market. So he talks about that the design, development and governance talk is going on the Open RAN. RAN is the radio access network for the telecom network, the 5G and the 6G. So everything in 5G and 6G, as far as hardware is concerned, know-how is concerned, is coming from America. In fact, a company like Jio, a big company like Jio, I am told that they are actually doing management and marketing of the telecommunication. That's all. Everything is coming from outside. This is the reality. Now, so he mentioned that, he mentions this as a big thing that is happening. So we are part of Quad and we are doing this there. Then he talks about that now we need in the global supply chains, we need resilience, we need digital trust. In other words, now we have gone, while our geography says that we are part of Global South is Asia, Latin America, African continent. We are here and we are a developing nation, but we want to be identified with the G7. And it is our thinking that the trust will be more digital trust with America than with China or Russia. Which of course, if you see the history of the Americans, I don't have to go in the detail. They are the people who have been spying on their own allies. Snowden case is there. Now, but this is what India has decided, that we should be there. Then, as part of Quad, this is where the Chinese say that Quad is a mini NATO. India is deeply involved, the armed forces are involved in maritime domain awareness. We are just buying the drones from them. Then also taking part in joint combat. So all these things are happening. This is about Quad, and certainly as far as Quad is concerned, India, if it was to consider its history, if it was to consider geopolitics, would really be thinking very hard, because it is not possible. Perhaps after 4-5 years, when, as I said, the technology standards will be set, it will be very difficult to interact or to do commerce with the other side. Because as I mentioned earlier, this technology curtain, this technology curtain comes from that phrase that the Americans themselves said, which is small yard, high fence. That is the technology curtain that is being drawn. Now I come to the third thing, very interesting, G20, which in my assessment was a embarrassing nautanki, what in English is called drama. Never before India has seen this. But according to Jaishankar, he said that G20 was a nationwide celebration. Of course it was. You ask anybody, because all over the country, thousands of crores have been spent, and everywhere there are screaming hoardings which are perhaps permanent. We are no longer in that rotational presidency of G20. It's a rotational thing. Every country gets it. But they are there. So the whole idea was, when he says nationwide celebration, he is right. And then he says that G20 was an initiative, a foreign policy initiative for the first time, which was domestically deeply owned. Of course. Why? He answers himself. He says that this basically was the international version of Modi ki guarantee. Now, this is what G20 was in a nutshell. Mind you, India had a rotational presidency, not of G20 alone. It also had of the SCO. How many people remember SCO? Nobody. But you ask anybody, they know, yeah, G20 कोई बड़ी चीज हो गई है, हो रही है, जो पहले नहीं हुई. So what is that बड़ी चीज that is हुई? That has been explained again by Jaishankar. He says that we are now the voice of Global South. Because right at the beginning of G20, at the conclusion of the G20, virtual summits were done with the G7. Look, the Global South, the African nations, they are quite happy to talk to anybody. And they consider still India as part of BRICS. They consider India to be part of Global South. But mind you, as far as the African continent is concerned, because this is being shown as a big achievement, that the African Union was made a new member of G20, so it is now G21. The fact of the matter is that in terms of trade, China and the African Union today have an annual trade of $200 billion, and the Russians, they are taking over they are supplying the military arms and ammunition to these nations, and they are throwing away the colonial masters, the French. So many countries are doing that in the African continent. So what are we talking about? Where is the African continent? At the BRICS summit in Johannesburg, out of 54 countries of the African continent, 50 were physically present there. So that is what has been said. Now, the next achievement is that DPI. DPI is the digital public infrastructure, which is for good governance, of course. Now he says that we are now giving it to the world. And we have given to maximum people. No country has given DPI, connected so many people with DPI. No, that's incorrect. Please remember, digital connectivity came 23 years ago, not today. It is not something that has happened now. And as far as China is concerned, the inflection point of digital connectivity happened in 2013, where 1 billion Chinese were connected to the internet, a far more number than India. So factually, again, this is not correct. And the next thing, the most interesting thing that is being said is the joint statement that came out. He says that we had the ability to build the bridges because our relationship with the major powers is very strong. No, that's not correct even. Because as I said, geography is our biggest opportunity today. Because in this changing geopolitics, what used to happen in Europe has shifted now to Asia Pacific. This is our strength. So all the big powers on both sides of the divide, they want India on their side. I've already explained our geography, our market, that is all there. Now let me now explain what actually happened at G20. This is what Jaishankar, and everybody believes this. Look, I'm not running down my own country. All I'm trying to say is that unless we will not see the reality in the face, unless we will not face the truth, we can never make a foreign policy that helps India. And that is what is my intention. Nothing more than that. Now, the reality is that at G20, two big powers which really make up the G20, their heads of government, Putin and Xi Jinping, did not come. And their absence was felt. Nobody spoke about it, but they were looming large across all the meetings of the summit meeting in Delhi. That is the fact. And the other fact is that once the Ukraine war started, the entire agenda of G20, because G20 came from G7, the whole idea was that after the financial crisis, the global financial crisis of 2008, G7 thought that we need to have more emerging technologies as part of the grouping, so G20 came into being. And that is how Russia and that is how China, I'm specifically mentioning these two countries because they are great powers, they also joined. And the other reality is that once Ukraine war started, in the last summit of G7 in Hiroshima that happened, it was very clear that the political agenda had taken over, had overwhelmed the economic concerns of the world. So today what we have is BRICS pitted against G7, BRICS pitted against EU. BRICS today has far more GDP than EU and far more GDP than G7. They are creating their own institutions, and in my opinion, the relevance of G20 has diminished a lot. Now, so what was this G20 about? It was a great opportunity for photo ops, that's one. And second, from the American perspective, this was the opportunity for the meeting, one-on-one meeting of President Biden and Prime Minister Modi. After Modi's state visit in June 23 to Washington, there was a whole lot of agenda that need to be ironed out one-on-one. And that is what happened at the beginning of G20. From the American point of view, that was the high point. And as far as the agenda is concerned, it was a very diluted agenda. If you read the joint statement, nothing like what was issued in Bali. It was a diluted statement despite the fact that the Americans wanted a strong statement on Ukraine, but the Russians insisted that they will not accept that. So it had to be diluted. But Russians obviously did not want to lose India, and neither do the Chinese. Chinese still sent their Prime Minister. The Prime Minister came here to give a very clear message that China favors globalization. That was the message he gave. So the point here also is that US, despite wanting a strong agenda, did not get it. Because it is no longer a unipolar world. For all their military strength, today they have 800 military bases. Their annual spending on defense actually is more than $1 trillion every year. Why I say $1 trillion is because the annual defense budget is something like 887 billion. Then you add another 100 billion, their intelligence agenda for the intelligence services. Then you have money for the veterans. It crosses 1 trillion. So the point is that all that strength is not helping them, because the entire architecture which has been created and which has really attracted the attention and the aspiration of the global south is the Chinese Belt and Road. It is about development, it's about connectivity. So much for the G20. And still, you go around and you see all these hoardings. I think they are permanent, they'll stay there. Next point, he talks about that the Modi government did cultural rebranding. Okay. Now, if you see cultural rebranding, what has happened is that in India today, under the government, religion has got conflated with nationalism. We are talking about religious nationalism. And this is the ideology which is being exported today. Mind you, no great power is exporting ideology today. The Russians are not doing that. The Chinese are not doing that. In fact, Chinese have gone to the extent of announcing the Global Civilizational Initiative. That means all nations have a civilization, so there is no question of any country interfering in the tradition, in the culture, in the religious belief of any other country. But we are exporting that, undermining our history and heritage. That is what we are doing. So much for cultural rebranding. Now, the last thing, perhaps important thing he talks about is that there is a Modi era diplomacy which is people-centric approach. Look, this people-centric approach is a great thing, but the fact of the matter is that the Indian diaspora, which is spread all across the world, especially in America, especially in UK, you see, they are quite enamored by this right-wing thinking concept, the concept of religious nationalism. But this is not what India needs. I mean, this is one of the problems today that India is facing. I mean, our neighborhood, Maldives, they came up with India out and the man won the presidency. Now we hear the same cries are happening in Bangladesh. The Zia Khaleda party, some people are now talking again of India out. You see, what we have done within the country, we have created fissures, religious fissures within the country, and it is having an effect in our neighborhood. And that cannot be good for India's secularism, for India's history, for India's heritage. So, if I have to conclude, I'll say that as far as the multipolar world is concerned, we are looking at a technology curtain aligned with what the Americans are saying, small yard, high fence. And as far as India is concerned, India has to craft a policy, a foreign policy, which clearly takes into account its history. A history of wars with Pakistan, a history of wars with China, a history that we need peace in our neighborhood for our neighborhood policy, first policy. And it has to be very honest about its national power, how it has to be built, and it has to be cognizant about the geopolitics both at the global level as well as the regional level. Thank you very much.